Brad, it's gonna be okay. I told you we needed to stop at the charger. I know you didn't want to, but it's gonna be okay. I'm just gonna walk back up the street. It's just a couple of miles to that house. It looked like they were having some kind of event. Oh, mistress, I didn't realize you were having lunch over for someone. Oh. Oh, I see that you are not. My dearest mortal, it seems that you're having trouble with your soul. How deliciously tragic. One simply adores the newfangled contraptions you humans worship that hum and flicker. Yet none of that disgusting stench of burning fuel. Why, it makes prowling for supper such a civilized affair. But fret not, sweet morsel. You've found yourself in most exquisite company. Allow me to draw forth those petty, mortal anxieties, to drain them, drop by drop, until you're left positively transcendent. We simply can't have you being such a pain in the neck, now can we? Hanging out here, on the step where anyone can see you. So, come inside. The crypt is cozy, and I promise we'll bury those worries 6 feet deep with style. Well, there's nothing like a drink from a freshly drained vessel, but I understand you're having a few minor difficulties. And so, as anyone who's had a stake in any kind of vehicle ownership will tell you, none of them are perfect. And I should know, I am, after all, still rocking that delightful 1960s family car I purchased nearly new with one careful lady owner and one substantially less careful. But today we're going to talk about some of the horrors that visit upon modern vehicles, some EV and some more general, and how to slay those horrors with as little drama as possible. And please, don't scream. It only makes the process more complicated. Today we're going to talk about charging woes, maintenance checks that you should do if you don't want to find yourself stranded and reliant on a stranger for assistance. Checking that your vehicle's vital fluids are not depleted. And of course, that immortal vehicle slayer in waiting, the 12-volt accessory battery. When it comes to EVs, there's probably been as much spilled ink on EVs in general as there has been on the topic of charging alone. Charging for EVs has come on in leaps and bounds over the last couple of centuries. I mean, not all of those changes have been an improvement. Time was that you had to throw a giant lever switch to connect your Baker Electric's accumulators to the grid, just like when you were round at your friend's house performing a little science experiment. We had such fun with Victor. But certainly the period of time when you needed to carry 50 charging cards and sign up ahead of time to each individual network, those days thankfully seem to be coming to a close. But that doesn't mean that every charging experience is one that goes flawlessly. Just like the days of yore when I would pull up to a gas station and Guillermo would end up wearing some gasoline thanks to a failure of the auto stop of the filler hose. Or so he claimed. Or some thrall would find themselves unable to pay because of a faulty card reader. Most disappointing. Things do also occasionally go awry with charging an EV. One thing that can happen, and which can be a source of significant anxiety, believe me, I've encountered more than one person this has happened to, including myself, is a charger car failure where it's unclear what has gone wrong, but the charging handle remains locked to the vehicle despite the fact the charger isn't working. And while in those instances it might be easy to howl like the very bowels of Avernus have opened, allowing Abashi to escort you down to meet your fate in service to Tiamat, unfortunately there is a less fiery solution. Most, but not all, cars have some kind of emergency release. It's advisable to familiarize yourself with how it works, if your car has one, and at least remember that it's in the manual somewhere, so that when you're stood at a charging station in the dark, and the rain is pouring down, and there's a curious bat watching you calmly, you don't get yourself all het up with adrenaline and spoil the get yourself all het up with adrenaline and stress yourself out. If the car isn't equipped with a release, or for whatever reason it did not work, the next best step is usually to call the charging station provider. Sometimes they can remotely halt the charging session and unlock the charging handle, freeing you. And if that fails, well then sometimes as a last-ditch and often effective step, you can disconnect the 12-volt accessory battery. If you're going to do this, make sure that the vehicle is as off as you can make it. Ever since the 1980s, most vehicles haven't exactly been off, drawing current to keep certain systems powered, to store memory settings in the radio and preferences across the various systems. In an EV, these systems are also doing things like looking after the battery, enabling charging to happen when the car is turned off, and so when the car is seemingly switched off, it isn't. So if, as a last-ditch effort, when you need to be freed from desire, freed from the charging station, and if you do decide to pull that 12-volt negative lead, make sure you do it using something insulated against electricity. Give the car a minute or two to reset before you reconnect the battery, and bear in mind doing this may lose stored preferences in the car. And don't worry, a few sparks are perfectly natural. Okay, so while we're talking about charging stations, this time of year, one of the things that is particularly important to check, especially on vehicles with CTS charging sockets which don't have secondary covers over their high power pins, is that some sort of small creature hasn't made its home in the nice quiet space there. Over the years, we've had a couple of incidents here at the channel thanks to bugs finding their way into sockets. Nikki recently had some stink bugs that decided to set up their soon-to-be mortuary in there. Upon plugging in and walking away, she was notified by her trusty steed via the intermediary of her smart telephonic instrument that it was unable to commence a charge, and upon further examination she was met by the most glorious smell of coriander, or, if those of you in the New World prefer, cilantro. And that, as any good entomologist will tell you, is the final death act of a trapped stink bug, squashed betwixt handle and inlet. Ah, the sweet, glorious smell of death. Delicious. One of our consulting clients recently sent us pictures of a failed charger where the socket had somewhat melted due to something that we suspect was an insect nest, and that was just on a low-power charger. Remember, it may only be as little as 3 kilowatts, but it can be as much as 19 kilowatts depending on your vehicle and the charger's capabilities. But even still, 3 kilowatts through a spider's nest is enough to make everything get very hot. And you wouldn't want to upset our arachnid friends. They can be so very binding when upset. So every so often, make sure that you're checking those sockets to make sure that there's nothing untoward in there. On one notable occasion years ago, some pathetic individuals shoved summer sausage into a charger, presumably because they were demonstrating what an alpha individual they were. You know, unstable, unreliable, and dangerous when used in a production environment. Fortunately, we noticed it before we got too much on the pins of the review car we were driving. Honestly, in addition to weirdos obsessed with sticking their sausage in things, usually under the assumption that their sausage is welcome because of their bank balance, we've also encountered charging cables that have been dropped in the mud, got gravel wedged in them, generally been damaged by someone else's carelessness. So it's worth just having a quick check to make sure what's going on before you connect it to the car and consume those delicious electrons. If you do find something unfortunate lurking in the darkness, there's no harm in breaking out a can of electrical contact cleaner or even a toothpick or similar to remove the debris. Just make sure it's thoroughly clean and dry when you connect your connector, and if you're not sure what you're doing, do talk to someone suitably qualified. And no, do not use water. Water is abhorrent, at least to creatures of the night and electrical components. You may use isopropyl alcohol at a pinch, but leave the water and all of its blessed impurities alone. And talking of corporeal matters, you know, creatures of the night. Winter, at least in the northern hemisphere, does bring with it the cooling of the weather, and while it was a relief not to have quite so much time with the day star searing one's eyes, it does lead to another concern, one that affects pretty much all modern EVs and all modern cars. And that is that many vehicles now use soy-based alternatives to petrochemicals in their wiring, so that a little void under the hood, the one in which one definitely does not store the odd little bag of A positive when one is traveling, well, it can often find itself home to mice or rats, or indeed anything that likes to make a nest and have a little bite. And although it's definitely true that both EVs and gas cars are prone to having their wiring nibbled, while gas cars tend to get cold fairly quickly once their hideously inefficient heat engine is turned off, something which does make them somewhat less attractive as a home for our furry friends, if, as is recommended, you generally leave your EV plugged in. As the weather gets colder, your car will start turning on battery heaters to avoid your battery becoming mausoleum-like. And to keep those cells toasty warm and operating at a region of peak performance. And that, in turn, means that the charging and power electronics under the hood will be warm. Possibly not very warm. The amount of energy used to keep those cells toasty is often very small, but just enough that mice and their brethren might decide to make it a home. There's a few things you can do about this. The first, obviously, is just to check regularly. And if you have a problem with rodents where you live, make sure you have some kind of pest control around your property. Before we bought it, our house was described as a rat highway by the inspector. Unsurprisingly, it's not a phrase I was particularly excited to hear. They do so mess up the inside of a coffin. Another is to use deterrents. I've mostly had fairly good results in the garage, so far as I can tell, with balsam fir oil botanical repellents. Because we have chickens, we can't have anything poison-based. And the other thing that has proven effective has been this. It's an electric mouse killer. This one is a fancy Wi-Fi one that can ping my telephonic device to tell it if there's been an untimely demise. You may think that this is most likely a rural problem, but while the scoreboard is higher for Nikki's house, it is pretty balanced between where we've caught mice. And believe me, you really don't want the fun experience I had of removing a mouse house from the cabin air filter. While we're considering the impacts of cold weather, winter can bring about the demise of one of the most unloved components of EVs. Despite various attempts to move away from the venerable and vulnerable old 12-volt lead-acid battery, many modern EVs still sport one, and because they're often considered by manufacturers to be maintenance-free, they're sometimes located in the most inconvenient places. While most EVs have got much better at managing the health of these accessory batteries, and battery designers have improved the technology that goes into making them, they can still often be a bit of a pain. That's because in an EV, a failing 12-volt battery is often not as instantly noticeable as it is in a gas car. When the battery starts to fail in a fossil-fueled vehicle, you'll maybe hear the starter turning more slowly. The car will struggle to start, and then you might have to thrall some peasant to work the starting handle or push your jalopy down the street so you make sure it's running and stays running once they're done. All of which is mightily inconvenient. Which is not to say that 12-volt batteries don't just up and die in gas cars. They do. But often their death is preceded by a deliciously slow demise. In EVs, because the batteries aren't ever loaded in the same way, instead the voltage can just become a little low and things can become a little unstable, and that can lead to all sorts of weird problems. The original RAV4 EV was well known to have charging and preconditioning issues when the battery was headed for its eternal rest. And our i3 failed to start at all, if I recall correctly, after its battery died. And Raven, our Nero EV, would randomly fail to turn on. Sometimes it would even fail to unlock. If you'll permit a personal statement, I believe the original Nero EV has an undersized battery. Replacing it with a slightly higher capacity battery has been pretty transformative to my car's winter reliability. So what can you do about all of that, other than regularly testing the battery, which is a bit of a pain? Well, the first thing is, as always, to look in the manual so you know how to get to it in an emergency. A lot of avoiding problems in the future is laying the groundwork. Making sure that those that you turn... sometimes I forget myself. The key to avoiding problems is often making sure you know your vehicle well. So just like you should know where the 12-volt accessory battery is, similarly it's also useful to know how to manually unlock your vehicle, whether that's by a physical key or by providing 12-volt power through an auxiliary power point, as some vehicles require. And while you're looking in the manual, I'd also say it's vitally important to know how to manually open the doors from the inside of the vehicle if your power fails, and you have a door that is servo-assisted. Personally, I also carry a small 12-volt jump pack in the car, which, before I resolved the Nero's occasional desire to become a grave ornament, was A very handy device and has proven useful to others suffering a similar fate. But yes, if you start to see unusual behavior from your car, then definitely get that 12-volt battery checked. Okay, and a few final cautionary words. We're heading towards the delicious darkness of winter in the Northern Hemisphere, and I'd like to remind you that it's a good idea to get your brakes and tyres checked before the winter chill sets in earnest. EV's brakes are used less, and so it's easy to forget that they should still be serviced and checked, because in an emergency you definitely still want those old-fashioned friction-based stoppers. And decent brakes are a little use if your tyres don't grip. And we wouldn't want anything to happen to you prematurely. Happy Halloween, everyone. I hope that your terrors aren't electrifying. Well, my wine should have had sufficient time to bleed. I mean breathe. I think it's time for me to take my leave.
Thanks for watching today. You can connect with us on Patreon, Discord, Mastodon, Blue Sky, or through our website. Huge thanks to the amazing folks scrolling by right now. You're the reason we can stay independent and keep making content without corporate influence. Want to see your name here? Support starts at just $1.50 a month, and you can even gift memberships. And of course, a massive welcome to our enormous list of newest members. Robert Vader, Uncoopervised, Toli Challinor, David Trobish, Chip Chandler, Tony M, Jesse Brooke, Graham Price, First, Cal Clee, 10 Lawn Gnomes, Pierre Simonson, Bow Family EV, Sean Instazi, Robert, Delute Fisk, Chow, Mark Williams, Kianala, Joseph Leibowitz, Ed Gauchi, Michael Benson, Felix Ramos, KS, SXBB, Scott Neblet, Gregory Alston, Ed Carmine, Anthony Van Lersel, Stephen Workman, James Erb, Neil Nelson, Devon Connor, Wimal Golding, Greg Smith, Fluffy, Seb, Brian Perez, Anaya, Johnny Santos, John S. Garrett, Michael Anderson, Daniel Nelson, Brett Steer, Russell Moraine, Tom Boyer, Frederick Gay, Christopher Dawes, Jamie, Ross Parker, Obi-Wan TX, Andrew Young, Matifk, Kelly, Friend of 10, LM, Jeff Vater, Mark Larson, Scott Allison, Javier Baraja, Murray Lissuk, Ken Phillips, Lee, Joe White, Russell Cooper, Ruel Howard, David McGurn, William Anderson, Vernon White, Brent Rinholm, Jonathan Quinton, Slime Elemental, R.D. Field, Tony McCluter, Scott Sexton, Mitch Rhodes, John Riley, Alexander Ginsberg, Tom Bick, Ray Stockdale, David Reed, BH, JedTech, David, Tom Bolt E, Dennis, Jerry, Winston Smith, Craig, Michael Y2, Cameron Gray, Chris Bailey, and John Burnett. Thank you all for joining in the last month. You're helping us hit our goal of growing Patreon support by 20 to 40% this autumn. And what a list! Thank you again for being so amazing and joining up. Without you, we'd have struggled to fund our new microphones when the old ones failed just last week. Prefer a one-off contribution? We've got Ko-fi, Bitcoin, a PO box, our swag store, and even an Amazon affiliate link. So your money helps us, not Jeff Bezos. We post new videos every few days on the main channel, plus extras on TE Take 2, and since YouTube comments aren't safe for us anymore, the best place to chat with us is through Patreon, Mastodon, Blue Sky, or through our website. If you want more, the algorithm thinks you'll like this video, but we'd love you to check out this one. Be awesome, be kind, be intentional,